My husband will never know the restraint I showed when we watched the movie by not saying every couple minutes, well, in the book. When you're a reader going to watch a book's adaptation to screen, sometimes you feel like you are in on the secret. You have knowledge that nobody else knows. I recently finished the book, went straight into the David Lynch 1984 film, and then with my husband watched part 1 of Villeneuve's film, and then later this week, part 2. For this video, I would like to go into some of the behind the scenes relational stuff that you just don't get when you're watching the movie. So if you have read the book and you're like, yeah, let's talk about the stuff that the movie left out, or if you're just a movie watcher and you want to know some of that stuff, this should be good for both groups of people, but spoilers for the whole book, except the appendix. I did not read the appendixes. If I have to read the appendix for the story to make sense, then it should have been in the story. Otherwise, skipping it. Also, if you have been following along with me with the book for this month for the read-along, this video is going to count as my discussion video for the end of part 3. I think where I'm going to start is Paul and Jessica and Paul and Chani. Paul doesn't really seem like he starts out as one of the main characters. He kind of grows into being that main character. It's so weird how the book gives away all the plot points. All the little excerpts from Princess Irulan, all the exposition, the Harkonnens or Harkonnens, just talking about their plans openly. We know all the things that are going to happen. So reading the book is more about the journey and how you're getting there to the end. So we know that Paul is going to have a lot happen to him and he's going to be placed on this high pedestal. Since before he was born, Jessica knew that he could become this lofty character in the universe. She knew that it was possible that he could be the Kwisatz Haderach. That has been on her mind. She has been training him. I actually really liked the opening scene in Villeneuve's movie with Paul and Jessica, kind of setting up how she has been training him, and that training is not the normal thing that a duke's son would be getting. He's getting some of that magical, witchy training. So Jessica knows what's possible for him. When she has Paul, when she should have had the girl and has the boy instead and is training him, what she does not expect is that they will be kicked off of Caladan and sent to Arrakis, where there are all these prophecies concerning not just Paul, but also her. They are both set up by the prophecies. And as a mom, it really concerns her. She doesn't think that people should be worshiping her child, but she also knows that the reason those prophecies are there are because of the Bene Gesserit having been there before and setting it up as like a safety net for them. So the way they are going to be accepted and kept alive is by stepping into and accepting those prophecies. I don't think she really likes watching the path that Paul is on. It's hard for her. He is having a hard time. He gets to a place where he's questioning everything in his life, every little decision that she makes. She can see him in pain and it's hard for her. Jessica never stops being a mom, but she also never stops being the trainer, the one who has to get Paul to where he needs to be. And at the point that Jessica and Paul get taken in by the Fremen, she is all Paul has now from his life before. He doesn't have his father. He doesn't have Duncan, Gurney, Thufir. And in the moment where he fought Jameis and won, I found it interesting seeing Jessica immediately step in and challenge him. How does it feel to be a killer? She knew she had to. She knew that was a pivotal point for him. And I feel like that would not have normally been her job. That would have normally fallen to Gurney or Idaho. But it was very important to her, knowing what kind of life he's being set up for, that he doesn't become someone who seeks out killing other people. Also, I felt like there was this interesting parallel when Paul and Jessica are in that tent together and Paul is having his transcendent moment and he yells at her and says, "What have you done to me? I am a freak. What did you do to me?" And Jessica's answer is just, "I gave birth to you," which is kind of a big answer because she did choose to have a son. She knew what she was being bred for and what she was supposed to breed. But then she has a second child. And with that one, with Alia, she does make the conscious decision to do something that could be harmful. She does drink the water of life while she's pregnant, and it has a huge impact on Alia, making her more of a freak. I don't know if Alia ever questions that like Paul did, but Jessica loves her children. She is in a position where she can't just be a normal mom, and I'm sure she has lots of regret. But she raises the children that she has. She cultivates their abilities. She does the best she can in the position she's in. And then another girl comes along into Paul's life. We haven't gotten to this part in the Villeneuve movie yet, at least not at the point that I am filming this, because I haven't seen part 2 yet. At least in the older movie, there is no stress between Paul, Jessica, and Chani. And in the book, you kind of see that Jessica knows from the woman's perspective what's ahead for Paul. Paul is a duke. Paul is being set up to be this messiah. He will have a high place. She also knows it's his plan to try to be emperor one day, and that he is not going to be able to marry for love like his father wasn't able to. And seeing how much he obviously is in love with Chani makes her worried for him. She's worried that Chani's pull on his heart will make him make poor decisions. And there's kind of some interesting mother-in-law, daughter-in-law stuff going on. It takes them a long time to just fully accept each other. They both love Paul. That's what puts the stress between them, but also draws them together in the end. Also, his near-death experience, the mother and daughter-in-law, Jessica and Chani, had to work together, had to rely on each other to bring him back. Jessica instinctually called for Chani. She wasn't sure why, but it felt like the right thing to do, so she followed that instinct. And it ended up being the right thing to do. Jessica also knows that Paul is probably going to have to marry politically. I found it interesting. I don't remember if it's one of those things she said out loud or was just thinking to herself, because Dune is full of those internal thoughts being shown on the page. How all the eligible princesses that Paul could be looking at are all Bene Gesserit trained. Really? So at this point, the Bene Gesserit have worked their way into all those high noble houses, and they all have a Bene Gesserit strategically placed for marriage and breeding. And again, I don't know if this will come up in the movie. The other bloodline they were watching closely besides Paul and the Atreides was Fade Routha. Paul, who was supposed to be a girl, was supposed to get with Fade, and their kid was supposed to be the Kwisatz Haderach. So now they're going to try again with Fade. And Count Fenring's wife, I don't remember her name, is the one who takes it upon herself to try to bear his child. Weird. Will that be in the movie? I don't know. And an interesting journey for Paul. Paul is so young. It's hard to remember how young he is, because on screen, older versions of the movie always have someone in their 20s. At least for this new one, they tried to get an actor who looks young, which in the book, Paul is 15 and looks young for 15, so people think he's even younger than that. And then when you get to part 3, there's a 2-year time jump. So the entirety of the first book, Paul is in his teens. He has so much responsibility from being the Duke's son and then Duke, but having people pretty much worship him is not good for a humble state of mind. He does get prideful. How could he not? He knows he has to ride Shai Hulud before they will fully accept him as Fremen, and when he does, he catches one of the biggest ones he's ever seen, he feels prideful. He did it. And when Stilgar humbles him purposefully, Paul gets angry. Very realistic teen reaction to having a fault called out. Luckily, Paul is smart enough to just accept it. Stilgar is right. It wasn't perfect. He has room for improvement. And Stilgar, when he looks at Paul now, he just sees like his fate. Paul is the one he's gonna die to. He knows his people and their traditions. He knows that to be a leader of the Fremen, you have to challenge and kill the current leader of the Fremen. And he knows, he has accepted by now, that Paul is, the Lisan al-Gaib, whatever. He knows that Paul is going to become a leader of his people. He knows Paul is eventually going to have to challenge him. just like Stilgar had to challenge the one before him who had been his friend, but that is the way that they do things. In fact, Stilgar's wife, Tharthar? I don't know how you pronounce that. It's like Thar, Hara, who Paul acquired from beating Jamis, who he could have taken on as wife but took on as a servant. Hara is convinced that she is going to gain Tharthar as a sister wife. She just knows that's the way of things. Paul will challenge Stilgar, Stilgar will be beaten, and Paul will acquire Tharthar just like he acquired Hara. And she's already treating Tharthar like a sister wife, and Hara is like emotionally preparing Tharthar for how she is going to be related to Alia. Alia, the weird one, the one that nobody knows what to think of or how to feel about or how to treat her. But they are family, and so they protect Alia. Oof. And then Gurney. Gurney survives. Gurney Halleck. I'll always be disappointed that he had to be played by someone other than Patrick Stewart. I would have liked if in this newer version of the movie they'd had him singing more songs. Otherwise, the casting has been really good. Gurney finally gets back to Paul. He can't believe Paul is alive. He can't believe Paul is this Muad'Dib that he's been hearing about. And he immediately accepts Paul as his duke, but he's also disappointed. I think this is a normal reaction. He lost his duke. He lost Leto. Now he has Leto's son. Paul and Leto are not the same person. Paul has been through a whole different set of circumstances, but in some of the ways that Paul differs from his father, Gurney is a little bit sad. And over these 2 years, he's probably mourned for the Duke a lot, but it almost feels like now he also has to mourn the Paul that he knew, or the person that he expected Paul to become when he took over the dukedom, dukeship, whatever you call it, duchy? Oh, another little note that I made. When Paul is giving his speech about why he's not going to kill Stilgar, basically why he's going to fly in the face of tradition, because he is technically the duke of the whole planet, he can't go around killing the leader of every single siege. We're gonna change things. I'm gonna be in charge of all you without killing anybody. Jessica is thinking to herself, this is a dangerous way to go about this. Paul is taking a risk here. And I found it an interesting parallel to earlier in the book during the dinner party, which is generally left out of movie adaptations. And she was thinking similar thoughts about Paul. When Leto got called away to deal with something and he tells Paul to take his place at the head of the table during dinner, and Paul is a little forward and a little challenging, and she's thinking that's kind of a dangerous way to handle this. And then she thinks the same thing later when there's higher stakes. Kind of speaks to the type of person Paul is and how Jessica still is the mother. She might rather him play it more safely, but he's the kind of person to take risks. And because he can see different lines, his prescience, don't actually know how to say that. He has a little glimpse of what might be the right choice, deciding to embrace being the Duke and choosing not to kill the siege leaders. He's embracing the prophecies about him on Arrakis. And at this point, I'm not sure he's doing it reluctantly. He doesn't want a holy war that gets out of his hands, but he doesn't see a way out of it. I like that they pointed out how the guild navigators were so dependent on their sight that they get from the spice that they've forgotten how to use just normal eyesight. They don't even know how to predict the future from what they see right now. And it has so handicapped them. Paul gets to use that as leverage. They are terrified of losing that ability and losing the spice. And I think it kind of makes Paul worry a little bit that he might start to rely on it, and he needs to be able to use his own mind and not rely on the spice or the future sight. Also, if you've only ever watched the old movie, you might not know that Paul and Chani have a son. And if you have read the book, you never actually see or meet the son, little Leto the second. Third? I don't even know what he is at this point. He's never on screen. He's used as a plot device, not even used that well. I'm not sure what the point was of having Paul and Chani have a child together. And realistically, in real life, there doesn't have to be a purpose besides they got together and life happens. That is how life happens. In a book, generally there's a plot reason, and it just seemed weird that the baby existed. Grandma Jessica gets to dote on the baby. Chani is expected to go back to where the mothers are, and then she gets called back to be with Paul again, and it's just, I don't know. I felt myself wondering what the point was if they weren't going to make a big deal of it. He, Frank Herbert. It was definitely not fair at the end when Paul and Chani have lost their baby, because that is what happens, and that's part of what makes it feel a little pointless, because there will be no progeny through that firstborn child. He has been lost in the attack on Arrakis, and Paul has to immediately compartmentalize those feelings. And this is not surprising that he did this with his feelings. When Paul's father, the older Leto, died, Paul was unable to feel at first. He couldn't. And so now, when it's Paul's son, he knows he's going to have to put those feelings away for later, like he did with his father. Chani is not able to do that as much. She is obviously broken right now, and Paul asks her to negotiate for him. How unfair. And also unfair to Chani, having just lost her child, being asked to negotiate, also for the marriage of this beautiful princess who gets to marry the man that she doesn't get to marry. And thank you, John, if you're watching this, for pointing this out, that at the very end, the thing amongst all that turmoil that Jessica and Chani seem to care about is their marriage status. I don't think that's what they would be thinking of at that point. There's subreddits that are like men writing women, or how do you know that this woman character was written by a man? That's one of those. Here's what I think the female characters would be thinking about at this point. Yes, they're related to a very powerful man. Paul is going to be the most powerful person in the universe, and they'll have to help him think about all the little details that go on in his life. That's not what they're caring about in this moment. I did appreciate the moment where Paul sees Count Fenring, one of the failed candidates for the Kwisatz Haderach. That was one of the moments that made me feel a little emotional. It said that was like the first sense of real brotherhood that Paul had ever felt with someone. That was one person who understood a part of Paul's life that no one else ever would. And when you are reading this book or watching the movie, you feel like you are getting that classic boy to hero trope. Paul is the chosen one. It may be the manufactured chosen one, the Bene Gesserit placing those prophecies there at just the right time for Paul to fulfill, but Paul is the chosen one. Boy to hero, but it's not. It's a trope subversion. Paul is supposed to be the Messiah that frees the people of Arrakis and leads them forth into the universe. And you know, maybe he is the hero to the Fremen, but not to the rest of the universe. And in this last read, this reread before watching the movie, I felt like I had a much better sense of Paul's age, his youthfulness. I felt like maybe I had a better sense of his internal struggles. At some point, it feels like he stops trying to do what's right or moral and just starts doing what he feels like he has to do. And that's how you get a gray character or a villain. Thufir. Thufir Hawat. Oh, Thufir. Oh, he got kidnapped. He's gone all this time blaming the wrong person. He finally gets reunited with Paul, and he gets to die in his Duke's arms. He was old. That was kind of a matter of contention between Leto and Paul and Jessica was Thufir's age. He deserves to be retired and get somebody new, and he was done. He was just ready to be done. He gave all he had left for Paul. I know I mainly focused on part 3 here because I was at the end of this read-along, so for those of you who have been following along, tell me all your thoughts from part 3 or even from the whole book. If this is your first Dune video here on my channel, tell me maybe what you're hoping to see from the movie part 2, or if you find this video after it comes out, what did you love or hate about it? And let's talk about Dune some more. Bye!